When was the last time you were truly alone with your own thoughts? No text, no group chats, no background noise, no one around to influence you. Most people can't remember. And that's not just sad, it's dangerous. Because the more time you spend constantly surrounded by others, the more your mind starts to shrink. Not in size, but in strength, in originality, in power. Society rewards sociability, praises connection, glorifies being available. But what no one tells you is that this obsession with being a social is quietly robbing you of your deepest asset, your mind. Every conversation, every gathering, every meaningless interaction that feels like it keeps you connected is actually scattering your energy, dividing your attention, and suffocating your inner clarity. You think you're building relationships, but what you're really doing is breaking the bond you were meant to have with yourself. The more you talk, the less you think. The more you blend in, the more you lose the edges that make you dangerous, unique, powerful. And it happens so slowly, so invisibly, that by the time you realize how far you've drifted from yourself, you barely recognize the thoughts in your own head. You were not born to constantly explain yourself, entertain others, or be accessible to anyone at all times. You were born with depth, fire, and focus. But every hour spent in shallow social environments chips away at that. It's not that connection is wrong. It's that the kind of connection most people chase is cheap, empty, addictive, and worst of all, it tricks you into believing that noise equals meaning. That busy equals important. That liked equals respected. But that's a lie. The truth is this. Every moment you give away to meaningless interaction is a moment you steal from your own evolution. What if you could reverse it? What if you could cut through the noise, pull your mind back from the crowd, and finally see with ruthless clarity? What if instead of being shaped by everyone around you, you became the one who shapes the room without saying a word? That begins with withdrawal. Not isolation from the world, but isolation from the numbness of constant company. That's where your power lives. That's where intelligence sharpens. That's where you stop being distracted and start being dangerous. Stay with this message. Because if you've ever felt the quiet frustration of being mentally scattered, socially drained, or emotionally off track, you're not alone. That feeling is your inner self screaming for solitude, for strength, for focus. What you're about to learn isn't just advice, it's liberation. From fake connection, from shallow approval, from the slow death of being too available. If you want to reclaim your mind, it starts with knowing what it's worth. And if you don't own your attention, someone else will. Keep watching. By the end of this, you'll never see social interaction the same way again. And more importantly, you'll never again give away your focus without a fight. You've been conditioned to believe that being well-liked is the same as being intelligent. That being friendly is the same as being wise. But Machiavelli knew better. He understood a brutal truth that most people are too scared to face. The more entangled you are in constant social interaction, the less time you spend thinking clearly, critically, and independently. And when thinking dies, strategy dies with it. You become reactive instead of intentional, a participant instead of a controller, a follower instead of a force. That's what excessive sociability does. It turns sharp minds into soft voices. It erases edges, dulls instincts, and replaces truth with approval. There is a cost to being too available. Every conversation you don't need to have, every fake laugh, every polite nod, these things seem harmless. But each one slowly trades your mental clarity for social comfort. You may gain popularity, but you lose precision. You may be liked, but you stop being feared. And make no mistake, being feared, being respected, being underestimated, but never outmaneuvered, that is how power survives. That is how intelligence thrives. Not in noise, in silence, in distance, in calculated presence. The ones who speak the loudest often think the least. But the ones who observe, who reflect, who detach, they move the world without needing to shout. What people call charm, Machiavelli called camouflage. What they call friendliness, he recognized as a weakness to be exploited. Not because human connection is evil, but because it is so often unguarded, so often driven by emotion instead of reason. And once your emotions are in the hands of the crowd, your mind is no longer yours. You cannot plot in chaos. You cannot master yourself while constantly managing the opinions of others. And you cannot rise while drowning in the noise of people who don't know where they're going. The person who needs constant interaction is not free. They're addicted. I am. Addicted to approval, to validation, to the illusion of belonging. But when you pull back, when you start choosing silence over gossip, solitude over distraction, intentional thought over impulsive chatter, you terrify people. Not because you've done anything wrong, but because they can no longer read you, control you, categorize you, and that makes you dangerous. That makes you powerful. The mind is a weapon, but like any weapon, it dulls when exposed carelessly. And right now, you're either sharpening your mind in solitude or blunting it with constant company. There is no in-between. If you want to rise above mediocrity, you must stop feeding off the energy of others and start building your own. If your thoughts are always influenced, they're never truly yours. And if your mind doesn't belong to you, your life never will. Pull back. Go quiet. Go quiet. Let them wonder what you're thinking, because that's the first step to becoming someone they'll never be able to predict or control. The most dangerous illusion in your life is thinking that constant interaction is harmless. It's not. It's mental erosion disguised as connection. You don't notice it at first, but over time your clarity fades, your originality blurs, your attention, once sharp and unshakable, gets hijacked by meaningless conversations and shallow demands. What you once could see with piercing focus now looks foggy. What once set you apart now blends in. Because every time you engage without purpose, you give away a piece of your mind. And eventually, there's nothing left that belongs to you. The human brain was not designed to process 1,000 opinions at once. It was built for depth, not noise. For strategy, not small talk. For purpose, not popularity. But look at what passes for intelligence today. People who can talk endlessly without saying anything. People who never stop moving but never move forward. People who feel smart only because they sound like everyone else. That's not thinking. That's mimicry, that's social programming, and if you don't actively resist it, you become it. Not by choice, but by exposure. Repetition rewires your instincts, and the more you're surrounded by shallow minds, the easier it becomes to mistake surface for substance. Mental strength is not built in groups. It is forged in solitude. Alone with your thoughts, your flaws, your raw truth. That is where real awareness begins. And awareness is the foundation of intelligence. Not knowledge, not memorized fact, but the ability to see clearly yourself, others, the game being played around you. That level of clarity cannot survive in constant conversation. It cannot live in people-pleasing. It cannot grow where your time is consumed by endless distractions disguised as obligations. You have to choose. Depth or comfort, power or popularity, truth or approval. You cannot have both. The cost of fitting in is your edge. And once you lose your edge, you lose your leverage. They'll smile at you, include you, praise you, but you'll feel it. That dull ache of unrealized potential, that quiet voice that says you were meant for more. It never goes away. It just gets buried beneath noise until you no longer hear it. But it's still there, waiting, pushing, calling you back to silence, back to control, back to the mind you once had before the world filled it with noise. You don't need to become a hermit. You need to become selective, ruthlessly selective. Not everyone deserves access to your attention. Not every conversation deserves your energy. You owe no one your presence. But you owe yourself your power, and power begins the moment you stop letting the world speak louder than your own mind. Cut the noise, guard your thoughts, train your focus like a weapon. Because when your attention is yours again, your intelligence returns with it. And when your mind is sharp, you become untouchable, not by being liked, but by being clear, precise, and deeply unshakable. That's what they'll fear, and that's what you were born to be. They want you sociable because it makes you manageable. When you're constantly surrounded by people, constantly exchanging words, constantly reacting, you become predictable, tamed. Your thoughts soften, your instincts dull. You start mirroring instead of thinking, agreeing instead of questioning, nodding instead of leading. They call it harmony, but it's really mental sedation. A brilliant mind cannot survive in a space where conformity is celebrated more than clarity. And make no mistake, every time you silence your deeper truth to keep the peace, you're handing over a piece of your strength. Social environments don't just influence your behavior, they rewire your identity. When you're always adapting to fit the energy of the group, you begin to forget who you are when you're alone. Your voice fades. Your inner compass stops pointing north. You make choices not from power, but from pressure to belong, pressure to be liked, pressure to be seen as agreeable. But you weren't born to be agreeable. You were born to be aligned with truth, with vision, with a mind that doesn't bend for approval, but stands solid in its own understanding. Mediocrity is enforced by the crowd. Greatness is built in defiance of it. And if you don't decide who you are, they'll assign you a role, one that keeps you useful but never powerful. The one who entertains, the one who follows, the one who always shows up, always says yes, always smiles. But power demands you disappear sometimes, not to escape the world, but to escape its grip on your mind. That's where your edge returns. When you learn to disconnect from the herd and reconnect to yourself. Your energy is your message, and when your energy is constantly diluted by small talk, drained by meaningless social loops, you become invisible, not physically, but mentally. You stop showing up in your full form. You stop thinking original thoughts. You stop asking dangerous questions. You become socially full but spiritually empty, and that's the fastest way to become nothing, liked by many, led by all. The discipline of separation is the beginning of elevation. When you can sit alone in a room and generate ideas, clarity, direction, strength, that's when you become a force. Because now you don't need the noise to feel alive. You don't need the validation to feel worthy. You don't need constant interaction to feel human. You've built something stronger. You've built inner command. That is the rarest power in this world. The ability to be whole without an audience. And from that wholeness, you gain the one advantage most will never have: independence of thought, not borrowed ideas, not recycled opinions. Your own truth forged in silence. That's where leaders are born, not in crowds. In solitude, in discomfort, in ruthless clarity. Walk away from the noise. Let the world wonder what you're doing, because when you return, you won't need to explain. Your presence will say everything. Most people fear being alone because they've never truly met themselves. They only know the version shaped by others, the version built through reactions, expectations, and endless feedback loops. Strip that away, and what's left? Silence. And that silence terrifies them. Not because it's empty, but because it's honest. In that quiet, the truth rises. The flaws, the wasted time, the thoughts they've buried beneath constant interaction. But if you can face that silence without flinching, you gain access to something they'll never understand: depth. Not surface knowledge, not social intelligence. Real, uncompromising depth. The kind of mind that builds empires in solitude and dismantles illusions with a single sentence. They call it loneliness to scare you away from it. But being alone is not a weakness. It's a sharpening. It's a crucible where the layers of false identity are burned off and only truth remains. You begin to see the world differently. You realize how much noise is nothing more than distraction. How many people talk just to avoid thinking? How often connection is confused with dependence? And how most interactions are simply transactions of energy draining, not empowering. When you're alone and alert, you can see these patterns clearly. And when you can see them, you're no longer controlled by them. Your mind is not meant to be filled constantly. It's meant to be emptied, focused, directed. But constant sociability keeps it bloated with irrelevant input, opinions you didn't ask for, expectations you never agreed to, conversations that mean nothing that still steal your time. And when your mind is full of noise, it can't generate clarity. It can't produce strategy. It can't imagine, create, or lead. That's the real damage, not the time wasted, but the potential stolen. Every unnecessary interaction is a silent thief. And by the time you notice, years have passed, goals untouched, visions blurred. And you've become just another version of everyone else. But when you choose isolation, not as an escape, but as a forged you take back control, you begin filtering your energy. You choose who gets your time. You decide which conversations elevate and which ones dilute. You stop being reactive and start becoming intentional. There is strength in that restraint, and over time, that strength becomes presence. Not loud, not performative, but undeniable. The kind of presence that shifts energy without effort. That's not built in the spotlight. That's built in the dark, in the quiet, alone. Let them chase constant company. Let them fear being by themselves. You know better. You know that the mind must be protected, not exposed, honed, not scattered. You're not here to be entertained. You're here to evolve. To strip away the need for validation and replace it with self-mastery. Because once you no longer fear being alone, no one can use loneliness against you. And that makes you untouchable. Not because you're disconnected, but because you're fully connected to the one thing that never lies, your own mind. Everyone craves connection, but few ever question its cost. Most people chase interaction blindly, believing the more conversations they have, the more alive they become. But when your worth depends on constant engagement, you stop being a thinker and become a responder. You don't move from intention, you move from habit, from reflex, from insecurity dressed as extroversion. The mind begins to decay not from lack of information, but from too much of the wrong kind. Endless chatter, surface level thoughts, artificial urgency, and over time the sharpness fades, the ability to reflect disappears. The habit of silence, where the real answers live, is replaced by a compulsion to be seen, heard, accepted. And that is the trap. The danger is not that you'll be excluded from others. The real danger is that you'll be excluded from yourself. You'll laugh at things you don't find funny. You'll agree with things you don't believe. You'll follow people going nowhere simply because you're afraid of standing still. But stillness isn't the enemy. It's the mirror. It shows you everything. The lies you've told yourself, the strength you've hidden, the decisions you've avoided. And once you've seen clearly, there's no going back. The crowd becomes loud but empty. Their praise feels hollow. Their attention feels invasive. Because now you know what's real. Now you've touched something stronger than approval. You've touched self-command. If you never retreat, you never return with force. Strategic withdrawal is not weakness. It's preparation. It's mental purification. It's how you strip away what's unnecessary so what's essential can finally breathe. That's where your edge is born. Not in a crowd. Not in a conversation. But in the quiet moment when you finally stop outsourcing your sense of reality to other people. When you stop looking for agreement and start seeking accuracy. Truth doesn't need to be popular. It only needs to be seen, and once you see it, your mind becomes untouchable. You no longer need to argue. You no longer need to explain. You no longer crave recognition. You just move, think, and build unapologetically. That level of clarity is not given. It's earned. It's forged through restraint, through discipline, through the rejection of cheap comfort. Because every unnecessary interaction you cut is not a loss, it's a trade. You're trading noise for silence, distraction for focus, popularity for purpose. Most people are too weak to make that trade. But you're not most people. If you were, you wouldn't still be listening. You're here because something inside you knows that your mind has more to give, more power, more clarity, more depth. And that part of you doesn't care about being social. It cares about being free, truly free, from noise, from validation, from the mental prison of always being on. Guard that part of you. Build around it. Feed it silence. Strengthen it with solitude. Because that's the part they can't reach. That's the part they'll never control. And that's where your rise begins. The world has trained you to believe that being available is a virtue. That the more accessible you are, the more valuable you become. But the truth is, the more accessible you are, the more forgettable you become. When everyone can reach you, they stop respecting your time. When everyone hears your voice, they stop listening to your words. Constant interaction doesn't elevate your presence, it dissolves it. It turns power into familiarity. And familiarity breeds contempt. Not always in loud ways, but in silent erosion. People stop seeing you as precise, as powerful, as rare. They begin to see you as ordinary. Because you're always there. Anything always available is never truly respected. Every mind that seeks greatness must eventually learn the discipline of distance. Not to isolate, but to preserve. Because your thoughts are sacred. Your energy is currency. And if you give both away too freely, you wake up empty and dependent. Dependent on noise to feel productive. Dependent on others to feel seen. Dependent on external stimulation to escape your own mental stillness. But that stillness is exactly where your evolution waits. It is in that silence where you uncover your real voice, not the one you use in crowds, the one you hear when no one's around, the one that doesn't seek permission, the one that doesn't apologize for its intensity. The masses fear this silence because they've built their identity on being seen. But those who rise know that being seen is not the goal. Being effective is, being strategic is, being untouchable is. And to reach that level, you must first become invisible to the noise. You must become unavailable to distraction, unreachable by anything that does not serve your mission. That is not rudeness, that is war. A war against mental fragmentation, a war against emotional dependence, A war against the slow death of your deepest potential. You're not here to be liked. You're here to be legendary. And legends aren't created in group chats. They're created in rooms where the only voices are your own thoughts and the silence that sharpens them. Every second you withdraw from shallow interaction is a second you invest in depth, in precision, in ruthless clarity. This is how you become dangerous, not by speaking louder, but by thinking deeper, not by showing up everywhere, but by showing up differently, quietly powerful, unreadable, sharp. Start pulling back, not as a retreat, but as a reset. Let people feel your absence. Let your silence echo louder than their noise. You don't need to explain where you've gone. Your results will speak louder than any introduction. The more you reserve your presence, the more powerful it becomes. Let others burn out trying to be everywhere. You, on the other hand, will become unstoppable. Because while they were talking, you were building. While they were mingling, you were mastering. And while they were being social, you were becoming sovereign. There is a difference between being watched and being understood. The sociable mind craves attention, but the sovereign mind craves control. Attention fades. Control lasts. Most people are trapped in a cycle of visibility addiction. They need to be seen, to be noticed, to be validated. But in their pursuit of recognition, they lose the very thing that makes them powerful: unpredictability. When you're always available, always explaining, always engaging, you become easy to read. And when you're easy to read, you're easy to control. The most dangerous minds are the ones you can't place. The ones who don't speak unless it's strategic. The ones who observe without reacting. The ones who are absent from the noise, yet present in every move they make. You do not rise by being understood. You rise by becoming unreadable. And that begins with detachment. The detachment from the need to socialize for the sake of it. The detachment from the pressure to be everywhere, know everyone, respond to everything. That isn't leadership. That's servitude to the crowd. And the crowd is not wise. It's reactive, emotional, forgettable. The crowd doesn't create, it consumes. It judges, it projects. And if your mind lives in that chaos for too long, you lose the ability to think beyond it. Mental sovereignty means removing yourself from that loop. It means choosing to be mysterious not out of arrogance but out of protection. Your ideas, your thoughts, your vision, they don't belong in everyone's hands. They belong in silence, in solitude, in the protected space where power is nurtured without noise. Every moment you choose stillness over stimulation, you're creating an advantage. Every distraction you reject becomes another layer of control over your time. Control over your focus, control over your focus, control over your trajectory. You do not owe the world your presence. You owe yourself your potential. And that potential cannot be unlocked in a constant state of social obligation. It requires withdrawal, precision, focus so deep it becomes intimidating. When you stop broadcasting your life, you stop inviting interference. When you stop chasing attention, you start commanding it. Not through noise, but through results, through movement, through energy that no longer begs to be seen because it knows its worth. Let them wonder. Let them talk. Let them guess what you're building while they waste their energy trying to stay relevant. You don't need to prove anything. You don't need to explain your silence. You are not absent. You are ascendant. And the higher you go, the fewer voices matter, the fewer opinions penetrate, the fewer distractions survive. This is the path of the unseen strategist, the thinker who isn't loud but lethal. The individual who chose power over popularity, clarity over chaos, solitude over shallow connection. And if you're constantly surrounded by the thoughts, fears, and emotions of others, your growth isn't yours. It's theirs. It's a reflection of the environment you've been absorbing. The real evolution begins when you cut the input. When you stop consuming what drains you and start constructing what strengthens you. When you stop participating in every conversation and start asking yourself what actually deserves your attention. That's the moment your intelligence level's up. That's when your thoughts begin to separate from the average. That's when you become dangerous. Not because you're aggressive, but because you're untouched. The world has always belonged to those who could stand alone, not those who isolate from weakness, but those who isolate from noise. From dependence, from distraction, because the higher you climb, the thinner the air. Fewer voices, fewer opinions, fewer distractions. The top is quiet for a reason. It's where thinkers live. Builders, strategists. Not social butterflies chasing applause, but warriors of discipline building in silence. Your mind is your territory, and not everyone should be allowed to enter. Most come only to rearrange the furniture and leave chaos in their wake. Guard it, own it, own it. Defend it like your life depends on it, because it does. You were not made to fit, you were made to focus. You were not made to entertain, you were made to execute. Every time you pull away from unnecessary interaction, you sharpen. Every time you choose your thoughts over their noise, you ascend. And soon they'll start to notice, not because you said anything, but because your energy changed, because your absence created space, because your silence demanded more respect than your words ever could. Let others live on the surface. You're here to go deep, deep into mastery, deep into clarity, deep into a version of yourself that doesn't need permission to exist fully. That version doesn't beg for attention. It commands results. It doesn't fear solitude. It feeds on it. And while others waste their minds trying to stay liked, you'll build a mind so sharp, so focused, so sovereign, they won't even understand how you did it. But you will, because you chose to disconnect from the noise and reconnect with power.